Okay, it is 7:30 and time for the Village of Martins Additions Council to be in order. We have two members zooming in, Andrew from Europe and Katie at home sick. Katie, we hope you're better soon, but please participate to the degree possible. Tonight, we have several things on the agenda that we want to get to, including possible public hearing and possible adoption of an ordinance to expand the ethics coverage. But to begin with, we have Keith Allen.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. For those of you that are here viewing the proceedings this evening, it looks like we're going to get a nice snowstorm tomorrow night between the hours of about 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and then it'll be gone. Probably get anywhere from maybe 2 to 4 inches around here, maybe 5 or 6 in some places.
Wow.
And but that'll be overnight. And since you won't have that solar radiation factor that you have during the daytime, because temperatures are going to be right around the freezing mark, most of the snow will stick to the streets and to sidewalks and so forth. So Hyman will be waiting in the wings for tomorrow night, Michael. But the snow will depart very quickly. The sun will be out and temperatures will be up around 40 into the low 40s on Saturday. So most of the snow by the end of the day will be gone. And then it looks like for the rest of the holiday weekend, because it is Washington's birthday or President's Day on Monday, it's going to be quite pleasant. Temperatures well up into the 40s to around 50, and I'm looking for a 60 next week.
Okay.
But there will be more snow on the way before the month is over and going into March.
Okay.
So not by any stretch is, winter over.
Put away your snow shovel.
Don't put away the snow shovel. So that should do it as far as the weather is concerned. Are there any questions?
No.
Okay, well then we'll move right on. I'll be back again with the community engagement.
Okay, thank you. They'll be coming up later. Okay, prior to considering the council considering of the ordinance on the ethics committee, we want to hear from residents views about anything, but particularly their views on expansion of ethics committee coverage. So who do we have? Any hands up?
Not yet.
Come on, you got to do better than that.
Alex.
Marty's there.
Okay. Hello.
Good. I somehow lost the ability to do the electronic hand raise. I don't know what happened. Guess I'm old, but I appreciate the chance to speak. I'll try to keep it really brief. I saw the email that was circulated to the village listserv. I sent a response, I think similar to the response you sent, Arthur, that tried to fact check some of the misrepresentations of that. Unfortunately, my responses don't get posted to the listserv. I'm not sure if they get vetoed or edited, or I don't know what's going wrong. But it's frustrating to me, especially that when reasonable fact-based positions for this ethics ordinance are posted, that they're either deleted or ignored or glossed over. I've been the chair of the ethics committee this year. I took this position with a very neutral point. I did it because I was asked to, and I feel like I'm quite objective on this matter. I see no harm in this position, and I see the antagonism against it as this fascinating crux of hyperbole and misinformation. And I don't understand why. I feel like the residents who object to it have gotten to be convinced of this nefarious reasoning behind the ethics ordinance expansion. And it's a mystery why that is such a sticky position. I'm not sure if any logic would convince the folks who are against it to reconsider, but it's frustrating that logic is never really given a chance to be heard. Arthur, I thought your message was really appropriate for this. I think that voting for the ethics ordinance here to expand it just makes sense. It makes it consistent for all village staff and volunteers. It provides a reasonable method for the ethics committee to provide an opinion. And of course, that is the limit to the amount of power that the ethics committee has, with the maximum penalty, so to speak, being a suggestion to the council to remove a person from their village position. The hyperbole related to legal consequences and, I guess, Gestapo style investigative committees, I just find very perplexing. So I tried to
Alex,
keep.
you don't think somebody could lose their security clearances over this?
No, I think that's hilariously laughable.
For a $5 million defamation suit?
If
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that opinion. Anyone
Thank you
else?
for hearing it.
Thank you.
Marty.
Marty?
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
No, there's a problem.
Okay. Hold on.
Take out your earphones and jiggle them.
Okay. Is that better?
No, you're not coming in.
All right, let somebody else go. I'll come back.
Okay, figure out what's happening. Anyone else?
No other hands raised yet.
Marty, you're the one, so get your mic going. I think it has to do with your earbuds. No. So nobody else, hands raised?
Nope.
Okay,
iPad has raised their hand.
iPad has raised their hand. iPad,
iPad, you're muted if you're trying to speak.
Are they able to unmute themselves?
Michael, you can't unmute them?
No, I just asked them to unmute, but I can't force them to
We
unmute.
live in Martin positions, and here we're hearing Andrew in Lear.
uh,
Right, loud and clear.
iPad. Unmute, please. Marty, get your mic ready. So no response.
It's Naomi. Just changed their name to Naomi.
Okay, Naomi, it's you. Unmute. Hi, Katie.
Hello,
Okay, you there?
her hand's raised. Yeah,
That's Katie.
Oh, Katie,
Yeah.
okay.
Well,
Okay,
if-
we'll give
does
you a
anyone
few
else
more.
have a comment? Otherwise we have to move on.
I see a hand up. Is that Naomi's?
Mhm.
yes.
Give you another few seconds or we'll proceed.
Bill Davis, did you have a question? Or a comment? Nope, guess not.
It's not our system because we are hearing some people.
Tell them all to hurry on down to the office here.
Come, you appear in person. We're sitting right here. Okay, not hearing any further comments. If you are able to get through before we're done, we will return to residents' comments. But not having heard anymore, we will proceed to the item that is up for discussion. Is the ordinance to amend the ethics ordinance to expand the scope to include members of all committees and to amend the government administration ordinance to provide indemnities for officials subject to ethics complaints. And what this does very briefly is extend the coverage of the ethics committee beyond employees, elected council members, statutory committees and positions. That includes the Ethics Election Committee and the Tree Supervisor, to all other committees that may exist. And it provides coverage, if requested by legal counsel, for those subject either to judicial review or to Ethics Committee review. So I will ask council members if they have any comments, discussion, amendments, suggestions, anything having to do with this ordinance. Anyone here? No. Katie, Andrew,
Andrew can go first. His name's first in the alphabet.
okay, Andrew, do you have any,
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess I would just like to associate myself with Alex's comments. I think as is the case often, there's a lot of hyperbole involved in pushing back on this particular issue. And I think the argument that fewer and fewer people will volunteer is erroneous. I'm certainly, having read it, reread it again, had conversations with folks, including with Ron and current and previous ethics committee members. I do not feel any concern about volunteering in the future for any committee or task force. And as someone who had a security clearance and may have one in the future, it just does not concern me. So that's all I'd like to say to the subject.
okay, thank you. Andrew, where are you?
I'm in Germany currently.
Okay, are you skiing or is this work?
No, this is going to be skiing in a couple of days, but not in Germany, further south.
Oh, okay, good. We don't want to take you away from the Alps.
Ask him if he's got the kids with him, because they might be sorry they missed the snow here. but-
Okay.
No, the kids
We're not going to have skiing snow here.
kids are at home. They're safe and sound with their mom.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, Katie,
Yeah, I don't really have much more to add than other than I'm just baffled why we're here again. I was thinking, I was doing the math and I was thinking about the original time we did this ordinance was March 2023, and now it's February 2024. And so we've basically been going back and discussing this for almost a whole year now. And I still always see it as unnecessary. And that is not a slight at the ethics committee. I respect the ethics committee. I even went to the ethics committee for guidance, on how to recuse myself from a recent variance. So it's not that it's not at a disrespect for the ethics committee. I'm just holding the line and I'm not changing my opinion. I just don't see this as necessary right now. I
thank
hope
you.
everyone can hear me. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, is there a resident now who's coming through?
Yes, Naomi.
Naomi, can we hear you now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't understand why I wasn't unmuted earlier, but I just want to ask the council to treat me and all of the residents who filled out the questionnaire with respect. The notion that we didn't know what we were voting for, or that there was all kinds of misinformation, is insulting. And it's redirecting, it's like saying, we don't like the results. The survey was rigged, therefore we're going to go ahead with whatever we had thought about, agreed upon earlier. That is not the way to conduct a democratic government. Enough said.
Okay, thank you. Any other?
Marty, can we hear you now?
Marty, you want to give it another try? No, you're still not coming through.
She's unmuted.
You're unmuted, but something's wrong with your mic.
Bill, this is still not working.
You're barely coming through now. Jiggle it.
Can you hear me now?
No, I can hear you barely.
Okay, let me hold the mic.
Because I can hear
You can hear.
Very quiet.
very quiet, very
You're
quiet.
very muted, but
And with all due respect, Marty, we know that you're not very quiet, so we're trying to
You have to interpret what Jeff just said, but go ahead.
Only with love.
All right, I'm gonna try here. Okay, can you hear me now?
Somewhat,
A little
a
better.
little better.
I think that I appreciate everything that people have said, and this ordinance, indeed, I agree with Katie.
Oh,
has been-
now you're going. Now it's coming in. Continue.
This ordinance has really been like a zombie. It keeps coming back, and the residents have overwhelmingly opposed it almost from day one when it was first proposed. There was an enormous opposition to it then. And I think Nomi's point about the survey results are really very telling. This is a representative government, and the overwhelming majority, 80% of the residents on the survey, did not support expanding this. I think the central fallacy here, the fundamental fallacy, is the notion that this ordinance would actually operate to protect people. And I think that you've had a lot of comments from residents to the contrary. One concern, I think raised by Peter Kahn and others, it has been that the folks on the ethics committee, although I'm no doubt that they're well-intentioned and would do their best, are not experienced inspector generals. They do not have the experience to conduct ethics investigations, and they are essentially, under the terms of the ordinance, put in the position of what would be a prosecutor in a court system, of doing an investigation and making findings. Those findings have legal weight. And when you have inexperienced people, not again saying anything about their integrity or their goodwill, but simply their lack of expertise in this very specialized area of law. I do professionally organizational investigations of workplace misconduct, have for decades. And this is a very specialized area of law. When you get into ethics investigations, it's even more specialized and more difficult. The inferences that one can draw, the standards of evidence are quite, what's the word I want? Sophisticated, complicated. It is unreasonable to expect a group of 3 well-intentioned neighbors to conduct that level of investigation. I think that this ordinance needs to be amended in a number of ways, one of which would be to provide an option for an experienced outside independent investigator to investigate any allegations and make findings. Because you are asking the committee to put itself in a very difficult position. I appreciate Alex's goodwill in being chair, but the structure of this machinery is not okay. And I believe it actually endangers volunteers because there could be legal findings by a committee of people who do not have the professional background to make such findings that are wrong, that are incorrect, and that would say that this person was legally liable for a violation, a legal violation of the ethics code of this village. That is heavy-handed. And I would much prefer, as I said 4 years ago, to see complaints about volunteers' misconduct of any kind handled with a complaint procedure, not raised to legal findings. I think that I would have to advise any volunteer who is faced with going through the machinery of this process. And Arthur, you were right the first time. It is a burdensome process. All those due process provisions that were put in there are all important. But at the end of the day, what that does is it puts a burden on the respondent, the person who's been accused, to try to prove that they weren't biased, which is very difficult. An ethics investigation is even more complex than the workplace misconduct investigations that I do professionally. It's really difficult for the person being accused to prove that they were in fact impartial. And that's why the legal standards for these investigations are so high and so difficult, and why you need professional experience to do these investigations. And the idea that a volunteer who's serving in all goodwill gets accused with an allegation that they did something biased. And, you know, many lawyers I've talked to said bias is in the eye of the beholder anyway. So it's kind of an iffy thing, and trying to disprove it as an allegation is especially difficult. And here we have a committee of 3 people, well-intentioned. I'm assuming that nobody's got any ill motives, but simply that they are being asked to do a task that requires a level of expertise far above what we can reasonably expect our neighbors to provide. It's an unfair burden on the committee, and it can result very easily in a mistaken verdict, if you will, mistaken recommendations. Those are legal recommendations that this person has. It's like a prosecutor making an indictment saying that, yes, I've investigated and found that this person is guilty of violating this law. That's in effect the findings that this committee produces. and they report that to the council for punitive action. The punitive action here is the least of it. Being removed from a committee is something that the council could do in the first place without going through this machinery at all. The council has full authority to remove any volunteer anytime, with or without cause. And so you have this person who's been accused of something that would be quite distressing, I would think. You know, it's about their integrity. And then they go through this whole machinery of trying to prove, you know, writing documents or whatever, trying to provide documentation that they didn't do something wrong, which is very hard to prove a negative. And at the end of the day, they've got 3 people behind closed doors who don't have the expertise to assess that evidence and make a finding. And, you know, I assume that the committee would try to follow the due process requirements, but at the end of the day, it's 3 people making a decision behind closed doors. That does not protect people. This fallacy, this assumption that this mechanism protects people is, I think, fundamentally incorrect. The way it would actually work, it would burden volunteers to try to prove their innocence. At the end of the day, 3 people behind closed doors make a decision, and they're labeled as having a legal violation of our ethics code. That is punitive in itself, no matter what the council does, whether they're removed from our committee or not. The very process of being put through that meat grinder, if you will, is punitive. And I think any sensible volunteer wouldn't say, I'm going to stick around and go through all this machinery only to have somebody at the end of the day come up with something that may be an unwarranted finding that would be negative to me. Why would any volunteer go through that? This does not protect the volunteers. And I think that there are ways to fix it. People have talked about recusal provisions being strengthened. People have talked about having an independent expert investigator do this, as opposed to asking 3 neighbors to do it. There's lots of different things. And this ordinance, the machinery, is fundamentally flawed. And I think expanding that flawed machinery to cover more volunteers is just the wrong way to go. We need to clean up our act on this ordinance before we do anything more with it. It does not, the way it stands now, protect people from unjust conclusions. And that's not the fault of the committee. The committee may try in its best effort and best intentions to do things right and still come out with a seriously wrong conclusion that finds people legally liable for a violation of the code when they weren't. This is not a protective mechanism, and it shouldn't be considered one. I really think that notion that this protects people is superficial. It looks at all the due process stuff, but it doesn't look at the actual machinery. And the machinery itself does not protect people. So Alex, I appreciate your service, and I know you do your best, but this is not a well-designed law, and it should not be expanded. It should be cleaned up before you do anything else. Fix the flaws before you try to expand it to anybody or apply it to anybody. Thank you.
Thank you,
Can I-
Marty.
I just add real quickly, I just wanted to add real quickly, it currently protects us, those of us who are current volunteers sitting before you, Marty. So I just disagree with your analysis of this language.
You would feel comfortable having these 3 people make a judgment about a legal finding?
It's currently in place, and I feel very comfortable with it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be serving. So let's have Alex respond, since he's the chair of the committee.
Thanks, Andrew. I actually wanted to sort of ask, you know, maybe for clarification, maybe specifically from Ron, but I think this misinterpretation from my point of view of the code of legal finding, right? I think Marty, you reiterated that several times, like the legal strength of the outcome of this process. I think that's something that I don't read it the same way as you at all. And it may be because your professional experience, which you alluded to, is, you know, it's very significant, right? I think the things that you're used to dealing with are high level, very consequential things. And it may be that in that light, you're reading this ordinance, whereas the light that I read it in is that this is appropriate to a small village where volunteers and council members work in close proximity on relatively minor things of, you know, of local significance, but not certainly of you know, national or you know, otherwise you know, larger significance. And when the remedy, as far as I understand it, the maximum strength of the remedy is dismissal from a position on a volunteer committee or the council, that does not seem to me like the same significance of remedy as a legally binding or legal liability in some court. I feel like if something were to happen in the village that rose to a criminal complaint, that would be beyond the scope of the ethics committee. That would be referred to whatever appropriate authority in the community, whether it be a county or, some other authority to investigate and adjudicate, right? That I would not personally feel comfortable, making any opinion on something that looked to me like a criminal complaint. So I hope maybe either someone can clarify that, like Ron in particular, whether my interpretation of the scope is correct or appropriate.
Is Ron on?
Is Ron there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay,
I would agree with Alex's interpretation. I don't see legal liability resulting from an ethics investigation as to whether someone breached their duty of impartiality. And just by way of further background, the village adopted in 2019 a policy requiring this oath of impartiality. There's been, I think, only one complaint since that oath was put into place, and it was noted that because the code wasn't similarly amended at the time that 2019 policy was adopted, there was essentially no one to review that complaint. So this ordinance expands the jurisdiction of the ethics committee so that that committee can review complaints or assertions, claims that someone breached their duty of impartiality. Whereas before, they didn't have that jurisdiction. And I agree with Alex that if an investigation were to result, the consequence or penalty is asking that person to recuse themselves from consideration of an issue that they may lack impartiality, or recusal. And since then, and during the discussion of this matter over the last few years, there hasn't been any other complaints. I think honestly that, and hopefully, we'll never use this ordinance. I've been doing municipal law for 16 years, and I think I've only seen 2 ethics complaints, over the many jurisdictions that I represent. They're pretty rare.
Ron, I'll
needed
correct
special
your memory.
expertise.
Right, there was one against me 10 years ago. That
Right,
the
yeah.
ethics committee at the time, I think, correctly adjudicated.
Right, yeah.
Maybe that's one of the 2 you're mentioning.
No, that would be a third, but
That
yeah,
was number 3. Okay.
I didn't count that one. Nothing formal was filed with respect to that one, as I recall. It was just a debate during a meeting. I'm right, but
No, it actually went to the committee. But
okay.
be that as it may.
And I don't think there any special expertise is needed by the ethics committee members. Notably, the state ethics law, which compels municipalities of a certain size to have an ethics commission, and it is called a commission in that context. And in Martin's Editions, we call it a committee. Thank you to whoever pointed out the typo in our draft. The state law requiring towns to have a state ethics commission because of their size and budget doesn't require any special training or expertise for those commission members. Generally speaking, I think anyone can aptly review this type of complaint, because I don't think it's a complex issue as to whether someone has a conflict of interest. I mean, it's tied to everyday morals that the ordinary person can understand. I hope that helps.
Good, thank you.
I have my hand up.
Marty, go ahead again.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Since there have been no complaints to speak of, why are we pushing this through? Why is this necessary? I go back to Katie's point. This has been one of the most controversial and divisive issues in our village. Can you all hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And it has caused great consternation. I know a number of people say to me point blank, and probably said to council members and emails to you all saying that we don't feel this protects us, that it would put us through this meat grinder of a process. And at the end of the day, it's three people in closed session behind closed doors making a decision that may or may not be valid. And they may or may not have read the evidence correctly. They may not know rules of evidence. They may not know standards of evidence. And they can come up with a finding that is, forgive me, a legal finding that you have violated the legal code of this village. And an ethics violation carries particular weight with people. It is an insult to people's integrity. If it's true, it's always serious. The penalty in this machinery is not the outcome in the sense of being asked to step off a committee. The penalty here is putting a volunteer through this machinery to try to defend their integrity or their innocence. And bias is particularly notoriously slippery. What looks biased to you may not look biased to somebody else. And it is one of the areas that lawyers that I've worked with, like I said, over the years, have just, cringed when they have to deal with an ethics violation, a bias violation, because it is so difficult to prove or disprove. And the findings made by an expert panel can be challenged in court. The findings made by an inexpert panel of neighbors can be very challengeable in court. If somebody were to say this was defamation, that this committee made these defamatory findings about them that weren't based on the evidence, I don't know. Does VMA have liability? We probably got sovereign immunity as a village. Do the committee members have liability insurance? I understand now that they do. That's a good thing, but that could be costly. So I'm just saying this is not as benign as some council members would like us to believe. There's a real downside to expanding this ordinance. There's a real downside to having it apply to the people it applies to now without fixing the flaws in it. This could really boomerang, and I think we need to err on the side of caution. I'm sorry we even have to talk about it again. Back with Katie, and this is like the zombie ordinance that keeps coming back, but I think people are really concerned about it for good cause. We have a lot of very smart people in this village who've looked at this, and they're looking at the downside, and they are concerned for good reason. So let's not be dismissive about that. We've got a lot of smart residents who've weighed in on this, a number of whom are very respected attorneys. And overwhelmingly, at least what I'm hearing from people, is don't do this. You look at the survey results, and what was it, 131 people didn't support it and 33 did? I think that alone is grounds for this committee to table this indefinitely. And I also want to pick up a point that Naomi raised with a number of people, which is, where's the forum? The council said last fall there was going to be a community forum to really discuss how these mechanics would work in practice, and we haven't had a forum. And I'm surprised that the council would even think about scheduling a vote after saying we need to have a community forum to really talk through how this would affect people. So I would urge you to table at least for now and schedule a forum so people can really look at this issue of how the mechanics would work. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving forward, Jeff, before we have final consideration, you had a comment?
Yeah, thank you so much. And bear with me here 1 second. Let me see if I can. There we are. Hi, everyone. Let me just make a few comments. I'll try and make it relatively brief. And I do want to just respect and appreciate that we have a whole bunch of different opinions here, and clearly we're not all aligned. And I'm going to start off with, in all fairness and frankness, just an expression of gratitude. I really am, because I think while it hasn't been easy over the last couple of months since this had come up, I do want to respect the idea that when there were some inputs from the survey, the annual survey, particularly around the indemnity and concerns about legal fees and legal ramifications, things that Marty and others have brought up. I had worked and proposed to Ron and Arthur and others on the council that we should consider this, since we already have an indemnity clause in our charter in section 2, that I think it's already inferred that this would be part of it, but let's just make it part of it. So again, while there's nothing that's ever perfect, I really want to thank them for including that, because I know that we've outlined a lot of the things that potentially could go I don't even have the right words, off the rails or concerns, whether it's recusal or other things, I think now we have the other side of the coin, right? That if there is a complaint that perhaps is brought forth in good faith, but perhaps the facts are misinformed. I know that there have been some complaints that I've seen that have been redacted. And when we've looked at them, that perhaps some of the information included may not have been exactly what had been known or what the actual issue was germane. So I think it's important that we have this other side of the coin, that if something is brought up, that there is that ability to have the legal defense. So I appreciate that. I think that's really good. I also think, recognizing when this first came up, I think in September, the council, quite frankly, had the authority, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, of a process for ordinance development. Under the current way that we do things, the council could have looked to put this on the agenda in November after the proper waiting period and say, hey, we're going to vote on adoption. And clearly there have been enough folks on the council that agree with this to push it through. But I think the idea that here we are from November to February, we were able to put a question in the annual survey. We've been able to have more discussion. So again, I think this is a glass half full that we've been able to do this. Now, a couple other just things. I do think at some point along the way, this became something that is not exactly about ethics. I really do, because I think that this has become, and we've recognized that there have been some personal and other things that have been expressed, I think, between members of the community and council and otherwise, where this has just taken on a life of its own. Because at the end of the day, the merits of this are good, right? We want a standardized process that, as part of the oath, that if there is an ethics complaint, it could be done in a way that's reviewed, researched, investigated, so that there's consistency. I don't think anyone possibly, I think we're all in agreement. Where I perhaps disagree with my colleagues is I simply believe that in the scope of VMA, and again, remember, VMA, we're a special tax district. We are exempt from things that perhaps others within the county can do because we are such a relatively small catchment. So, and again, with all deference to Alex, but also all the folks, the magnificent folks who've sat on the committee and worked really hard, Mark Efron, Lori, a whole bunch of other folks who I'm not naming. This has nothing to do personally with them. It's more of the idea of, is this a tourniquet when we really just need a Band-Aid? And so, for example, if we know that there's perhaps a complaint, maybe two complaints, certainly less than a handful of complaints, and is it really the idea that we have to have a standing committee that is sort of watching over that, maybe in the off chance in 5 or 6 years that something may come up and we leverage them? And I do believe that there is some esotericness around the idea of how do we understand and how do we adjudicate, how do we even review an ethics complaint when our own Supreme Court has trouble understanding how ethics applies to them. So again, in all deference to Alex and others, I just feel that the more appropriate Band-Aid here is not about, again, arguing that a standardized process is or is not what we need. It's the idea of, I really like the idea that when something comes up that is that serious, that we do have a third party. And I don't exactly have the name for it. Is it an arbitrator? Is it, someone, there are a bunch of folks who probably do this for a living that you could go to and you could bring the complaint to them. And, they could do it in a way that I believe would really resolve a lot of these questions around how could we have our own residents, our neighbors be part of a body that is, and again, even if it's just a relatively small piece of the whole process, because we know that they can consult with a legal counsel to really get a specific finding where they may feel they need more information. It's just, I think that there is an awful lot of, I don't even have the right words, angst, or it just doesn't feel right. And again, we can't ignore the results of the survey. And we've seen enough folks say that this is a detriment to them and that they really will reconsider the idea of volunteering. I'm not saying we're never going to have enough volunteers, but I do believe that if we have some of our most dedicated and vocal residents who have volunteered and who serve and say, something, this just doesn't sit well with me, I believe that we should take pause and say, what is it that we could do? And I promise just a few more points, and then I have kind of at the end a little bit of a wish list on this, but it's all good. So the other piece on this that I've heard around theme is it's deja vu again. And again, I'm going to table this for a little bit further down the road. Because Katie, you brought up this idea of, we've been here a year later, why are we still doing this? But again, I mean, I'm looking at this, and again, I say it with respect, but we've been doing this since 2020. So it's really practically 4 years of this. And so I do think that you have to go back to that this was a very controversial hot button topic then. And Arthur, and again, I respect it. I mean, Arthur is like a mind of analytic computer. He takes all the facts, he takes all the data, and he calculates, and I do believe in good faith, always comes up with the decision that he feels is in the best interest of the community. But let's face it, Arthur, and again, I say it with respect, you've changed your position on this each and every time. So again, I say that
just once.
Well, the first time, remember, it was the idea that we had this originally to cover everyone, and you were kind enough to propose that, yes, we should restrict it. And then in the last time, remember, in April, when this had come up, I believe that's when it came up last for a vote, you had, again, thought it was too much. And now today, without knowing exactly how you're going to vote. So it's been a number of times. And I do remember in a debate we had in a forum for a candidate forum, you actually had mentioned that you had forgotten your position. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, so I just say that it's been a long time. There's been a lot of different things, and, it's okay to shift positions, but I do think that we have to respect that there are many in the community that haven't shifted, that there's something there that is difficult. And so, again, just another things around that deja vu, we'll get to it when we talk about the ordinance process. But again, putting this in a way that is not pointing fingers or being antagonistic. I think we talked about this. Forget that this is about ethics. What if this were about anti-Semitism, right? And it's the idea that thinking through carefully about one council member who changes their mind, the idea is that that shouldn't be the sole factor of why we're here today. That we do have a process, right? That the process is that we have a discussion about what it is that we need, and we introduce that or have that as part of a public. Michael, I see you kind of shaking like I don't. So I just want to be very, very clear that we skip steps here. And I just want to be careful. So when we do get to this next part of the agenda, that really this is not about changing an individual's mind. It's that, remember, this is not a reintroduction. This had to be considered as a standalone new piece of legislation. And we'll also talk about, I know that Somerset was one of the reference documents. I think something that we also have to think about here is in Somerset, they have a mayor. And the way that that is set up is that the mayor has certain authority about how they can propose legislation, and it's written up in this code. And so the real question is, I think that we had taken on how this process shaped was that one council member could shape the agenda, could put it on the agenda, and really move this forward without that discussion. And I think if you're in the minority.
I read the Somerset, well, this should come up later.
But remember, Somerset has a mayor and we don't.
Yeah.
So that's a big distinction.
Their process does not differ from what we've done.
Except for the fact that.
Well, let's talk
We'll
about
talk
that
about
later.
that. Okay.
Continue with ethics.
So a couple other pieces then. And I agree with some of the other thoughts without trying to regurgitate the same things. But look, I brought this up in an email I shared. There's a famous case study around holding on to the horses, right? And holding on to the horses was around this understanding and study of the British Navy looking at the turn of the last century of trying to get more efficient. They did a time-lapse study and they realized that all of a sudden folks were pausing for 3 seconds before they discharged. And no one could understand what this was, right? And so they found this retired colonel of the military, and they brought him in as a consultant. And he looked at this time series and he said, aha, I got it. It's about holding the horses. And what does that mean, right? Holding the horses, you're on a boat. There were no horses to be seen, but this was a process, a machinery that had taken effect long before on how to do these drills. And because of the bureaucratic process, it just spilled over in actually a naval vessel. And so I put that out there because the talk is that, oh, well, you know, we have this machinery that's been in place and it's already there. And so really it's a non sequitur to just extend it. And I think that there have been some important things around that have been brought up around process and other pieces. But again, at the end of the day, I believe the indemnity clause will provide those protections, because if those flaws are there, then someone who is accused can bring that up with their lawyer and point those things out and perhaps get it dismissed. But I don't want to dismiss the fact that they are there. And I also want to address something that Ron and Alex had brought up. And again, I want to say it out of respect. Look, not only common law, but there has been some judicial opinion, and there has also been some other opinions issued in other states where the ethics violations have actually risen to a much greater level. We've actually seen council members and municipal members actually sued and ultimately recalled through election. And as part of these judgments and decisions, then there have been some opinions rendered around that they should be reimbursed, because ultimately, after further review of those complaints, it turned out that those complaints were meritless or baseless or didn't hold. So I do want to just point out that it's not a simple nothing burger. Maybe perhaps in one view, you may say, oh, it's a resident who, well, the worst case, maybe they're taken off a committee. But what if they were thinking about running? Or again, maybe for them and they're retired, being on that committee means something. So I don't want to dismiss that. And I also don't want to dismiss where this has taken up a much larger scale on the national stage. Now, I would like to say that in PMA, it may not ever reach that stage, but it has. And so I don't think that we should dismiss that. And then finally, hitting the home stretch, I promise. I want to just, again, really stress the whole idea of we have an exceptionally smart, extremely educated, very intuitive residency. And when you have this number of folks just saying they don't feel comfortable or they want new information, I appreciate that there's the view of that this is perhaps a nothing burger. And you know what? Really, at the end of the day, there aren't that many complaints. And as Ron is saying, I'm hoping we never use this. This thing is going to gather dust. But I just want to say, putting all of that aside, we have hit a nerve that is hard to dismiss. That there are folks who have resignedly said they will never volunteer again because of this. Now, I'm not saying it's fair. I am not saying that it's justified. I am not saying anything. I am just saying that we can't undo how people feel, and it's a lot of people. And so it's just something to think. So, okay, last thing, I promise, my wish list. You know, Arthur, you did this for the election committee and the policy, and we said, hey, you know what? Make a list for us around the things that we feel are not perfect or things that we haven't addressed so far. Let's have that wish list. And you know what? Maybe the next council or whenever it is, let them address it. And so I just want to share that. I really, again, I want to take this all in the scope of good faith from either side. But, you know, recusal, hey, sounds like a reasonable thing to think about. You know, this idea of, well, what about the idea of seeking a third party, you know, arbitrator? And again, the sustainability piece. I mean, if you really only have a complaint every X number of years, or if ever, I mean, it does then alleviate the pressure, frankly, of staffing a committee, which I don't know how many people are going to be laying the server. What if it's the same number? And it just gives us those options. So that is a long, perhaps more winded than I expected, but I do want to just appreciate, I do hope we get to do that wish list, because I do think there are things that we should continue to consider. And then the last thing before I turn it over to you is, Arthur, I just want to understand there is also some kerfluffle around the definition of public official. And I wanted to just know if that had been resolved or.
It's still kerfuffling.
Okay,
Let me just mention very briefly what that is.
so with that, I'm turning.
Okay, there, in the draft legislation and in the code, there is the first thing that comes up is a definition. And it says, public official in quotation marks, or official means, and then there's a list of things. It means a member of the village council, a member of the election committee, a member of the ethics committee, the village tree supervisor, all members of any other standing or ad hoc committees or task force, and any code force enforcement officer as defined in section 3-101C. In order to avoid that list, our council has come up with the term public official. We could call it anything else, a herd of elephants, a ship of fools, anything. Public official is just a term that's being used. I have to say that when my wife read, I said, what does this mean to you? She said, public official, it does seem to have that effect on people, that calling a public official raises issues, but it doesn't mean anything other than the following list.
And the
So-
designated list.
The designated list, that's it. It doesn't require any duties, activities, responsibilities, anything other than this list. It's shorthand. With that, do I hear from any other council member any suggestions for change, amendment, comment, anything else?
Could you also clarify
Yeah.
one thing? We talked about indemnity. I think it's pretty clear about the idea of reimbursement for legal fees. Could you just, you or Ron, address the issue of insurance? So that's also clear.
Well, the village is insured by Legit, which is a statewide, maybe bigger than statewide. They specialize in covering municipalities. Michael checked, this came up with the election committee, wanting to know, because there have been a lot of actions around the country against election committees and election officials. Were they covered by the state, by our insurance? Michael?
Yes, they are.
They are, and other committee members are, by actions brought by or against them.
In the scope of their duties.
What's that?
In the scope of their duties.
In the scope of their duties, yeah. If something happens when they're walking down the street as a citizen, they're not covered under that.
So just being clear, because I think so with the amendment, the indemnity clause that was already in section 2 is going to include VMA ethics complaints.
Yeah.
And it sounds like already, and again, this was with or without this term official, which I also feel, you know, which I've expressed some opinions on, regardless of using that term, the insurance was there to cover anyone who is acting, let's say, as a VMA representative, whether it's an elected official or a resident volunteer in their duties.
Yes.
Okay.
I invite anyone to submit other phrases, words that can substitute for public official here. We're open to ideas there. Okay, with that, we have no more comments from Andrew or Katie and the table. Then I invite a motion to adopt ordinance number 2023-9-1 to amend the ethics ordinance.
Before you just go around, I just want to, because I know there's a lot of stuff, it's like layers. So In doing this, is this also lumping in the indemnity clause?
Yes,
or is that
it
separate?
is, no, it is in
It's
the
part of
amendment here. It's part
part
of
of the
it.
definition of
It's
the.
part of it here. Okay,
ordinance.
we have a motion
I
to
would
adopt.
like to so move.
Do we have a motion to adopt? Do we have a second? I will second. Do we have a vote? All in favor of adopting ordinance to amend the ethics, ordinance number 2023-9-1? All in favor? Say aye. I can't see.
There's
And we
Amber.
have an aye online. All against? I can't see. Is Katie
Yes, I'm against.
against?
I am
Yes.
going to, as a semantic, because I appreciate the idea of the indemnity, and I think that is really germane and critical, I am going to vote present.
Present, okay. So we have a vote 3, 4, 1 against, 1 present. The motion carries and the code is adopted. That deserves a gavel. Moving on.
To drink.
Approve the January 18 council meeting minutes. Everyone has had a chance to look at them, review them. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes? We have a motion to approve. Second. I will second. Vote to approve the minutes. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We have vote. Okay, we have all in favor.
Yes.
Okay, committee reports. Let's begin with the election committee. Marty, you're there. We're not hearing. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, they're coming in. Continue.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to present our report. Things are on track. We want to thank Michael for his very efficient assistance with getting the contracts all set and in gear. We're working with the voter roll contract, Mr. Lampier, to update and verify the voter roll. That's in process. We're also working with the mail vote contractor Eclectic to prepare, for the ballots and all this spring. There is one minor complication with Eclectic this year. One of the requirements that we've had in our election regulations ever since we've been doing mail voting is the requirement that the ballots be tracked, that we have, postal tracking, especially on the return ballots. So we know that we've gotten most of them, at least if not all of them, when we do the vote counting, and that there aren't 50 ballots sitting in the New Jersey post office somewhere. And Eclectic says that the company that they were using to do that mail vote tracking on the return envelopes no longer does that. So the committee is looking into that. We've asked Michael for his assistance to see what the post office can do. There is actually a bill in Congress nationally to require postal tracking on ballot return envelopes nationwide. It hasn't passed yet, but it looks like it might. So this is not something, that's unusual in any way. And we've asked Eclectic, our contact there, to please look into it from their end with the post office up in New Jersey that they use to see if there's some way we can actually comply with what the regulations call for, which is that very important postal tracking on the envelopes. And we'll get back to you with a report on that. We don't have an answer yet. But in terms of the election process, other than that technical detail, everything's rolling along on track. We posted the official election notice as legally required in the February 24 BMA newsletter. We had a short article. We'll have articles in the newsletters each month from here on out through the election. On or before February 22nd, we'll post the official notice of the nomination period. The candidate filing date, as I think you all know, is March 23rd. And obviously, we'll be glad to answer any questions about the process anywhere along the line. We do have 2 specific requests for council action on the agenda tonight, and both of these are one-pagers that are in the packet. The committee unanimously voted to ask the council to approve the one-page VMA voter form, which I think you all have seen. We sent it around earlier, and it is in the packet. That's required by the election regulations, and the form that the committee developed was, I think, very clear, very easy to understand. Ron had one word change in it when Katie asked him to review it. The committee made that one word change. It will be really very helpful to have that form this year and for future elections as well. Again, we're trying to establish procedures here that don't need to be changed from year to year, that really will stand as good, solid procedures from now on. So we would ask you to approve that one-page voter form at this meeting, by simple council vote. We also, in response to Arthur's request, put together that appendix. I think, Jeff, you referred to the appendix of, things to be done in the future that still need some attention. And that's a one pager as well. We hope that the council will follow up on that over the next few months. There are some things that could be put in fairly quickly and easily, and there are some things that would take some time, like some chartered updates that might be necessary. Anyway, it's a one-page list. We hope it's clear, and that was unanimously recommended by the election committee. So what we need to vote on tonight, please, is the voter form, that one-page form, and
Right.
then future action from there on. So thank you very much. There's only one other request we had from a resident that came in, because we've been very open, as you know, to community input, which I think is really important when it comes to election procedures. There was a request from a resident that referred to a situation some years back where the incumbents, in fact, decided not to run, but didn't tell anybody ahead of time. Andrew, you may remember, you were one of the candidates, I think, in the election that year. And there was a request from a resident, would the incumbent candidates this year let people know before the filing deadline of March 23rd, whether or not you intend to run? I think that's a public courtesy. There's nothing in the regulations that requires it. And I know sometimes people make up their minds at the last minute. Believe me, I understand that. But that it would be an issue, the way that the resident put it, it's an issue of transparency and a public courtesy for the incumbents to let people know before the filing deadline whether or not your seat will actually be open or whether you're running again. So I put that out there for your consideration. There's no requirement there. It's a request, but I think it's a reasonable one. Thank you. I'm
Good,
done.
thank you. Thank you. Ron, in approving the declaration of eligibility to vote, this is a policy that we will approve?
Yes, that's correct. It would just be approval of the form, which would be
Right.
deemed implementation of the rules that you've already approved.
Okay, so I will move that we consider approving the declaration of eligibility. And just put it open to a vote. Any discussion?
No.
Katie, you had your hand up?
Oh,
Is
no,
that
I was just
aye?
gonna vote
Okay.
for it.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Okay, I vote to approve.
She's not holding her horses.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
I'll vote to approve.
okay. And Andrew, are you there? Is Andrew still here?
Raise his hand.
Okay, we have an aye. Okay, we have voted to approve the declaration of eligibility. Thank you. And
Okay.
we have the list of suggested changes for the future. Thank you, Marty, for putting this together. Okay, other committees. We have the Community Engagement Committee.
Community engagement. Take 60 seconds on this.
Good.
We're getting ready for 3 weeks from Sunday to bring the community all together here at the Brook, the La Ferme restaurant. And I'm very excited about that. I'll be there to meet and greet everybody coming in. And that's a community brunch. And I've invited all the merchants also.
Good.
I'm personally very excited about it.
Good. That's it. Thank
Can
you.
you announce the exact date for folks listening in?
Sorry.
It's
uh,
March,
What's the date?
it's March 3rd from 1 to 4 PM, the community brunch at La Ferme.
Good, thank you. The Water Committee has a $600 request to have a seminar presented by Mr. Azar, who has done a water study for Chevy Chase View and is familiar both with the Village of Martin's additions and with other areas and has been working with other areas. So I don't think we need an approval, just to report that they will be seeking $600 seminar fee. They are also looking for more engineering input into their study, but that will follow being educated in the seminar about what are the things they should be looking at. And they're also beginning the process of putting together a community survey. Any other committee updates? Anyone representing Alex? Is Alex still here from ethics?
Alex is still here, yes.
Alex, anything you want to say about the ethics committee? No, apparently not. Okay. No other committees being present or reporting?
Naomi has her hand up.
Naomi,
Hi, as you know, I chair the Task Force on Anti-Semitism Education and Awareness, and we are slated to meet next week to hear from the American Jewish Committee about the survey results post webinar, which, as you know, garnered well over 100 participants. I think only about 20 or 30 completed the evaluation. So I'm hoping that we will have some concrete results. But in any case, we might learn something from their view about the webinar. And we will ask the task force to approve that we share the link to the webinar with the rest of the residents in our neighborhood, since only about 20 or 25 people attended the webinar. And we will post the resources that each of the participants received after the webinar. And then we will ask folks in our neighborhood whether they want to go on with activities such as participating in a library exhibit during Jewish month of May, Jewish History Month of May, whether we want to organize trips to the Holocaust Museum, to other museums where we can learn about Jewish history, and whether we want to encourage our Jewish neighbors to invite non-Jewish neighbors to Sabbath dinners and other occasions where they can learn about our culture. So all of that is coming up, and I will report on that at our next meeting.
thank you. So again, Naomi, your next meeting is what day?
February 21st at 8:30.
Thank you. We'll be
Mhm.
there.
All are welcome.
Good, thank you.
Okay.
That's it for committees, correct?
Correct.
Okay, moving on the agenda. Jeff has been looking at, thinking about, and putting together some ideas on the ordinance development process.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. I expect that this conversation will be relatively short. It is
Okay,
a conversation. I pulled together a couple possible steps as a framework, but I also just want to acknowledge that the information that this draws from has been out there. So for example, Arthur had initially proposed many of these steps back in 2021. And so, really leveraging, I think, things that he and others felt were part of what we should consider as a normative process. Ron also, again, as I want to acknowledge his always thoughtful advice and his experience, not just here, but other jurisdictions. As I mentioned in reference, Somerset. And then finally, we may, not everyone may recall this, but the residents here in VMA, again, just putting in perspective, this was during COVID. It was, there were other ordinances. It just happened to have been ethics, I think, that again was another hot button, but that really precipitated a document by VMA residents about what they would like to see. And the good news is a lot of this is common sense. A lot of it is what we do. And I think that there's just a couple pieces that we want to just think about is how do we kind of understand what we've had, again, in good faith in the last couple of months and say, let's raise and look at this guideline, see what transpired, and are there any things that we could do without limiting the ability for the council or chair to feel like they're doing their job, right? We don't want to create a situation where anyone feels that, especially in a public emergency or whatever it might be, that anyone who has the gavel or otherwise feels they're limited. But anyway, so let me put it out there. So with the drum roll, I'm going to just share one. I promise, Andrew, and if he's still there, it's just one slide, I promise. And I will make this relatively brief.
Do I need to make you sender?
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna share it. Thank goodness Andrew dropped, otherwise that he was going past Past the bewitching hour, as they say. Okay, I got it. So, can you see it now? Oh, perfect.
Come over and look.
And then what I'm gonna do is just put on the slide and then do this. Okay. So, okay. So again, this is kind of conversation, and I'm not expecting any actions today, but it's really just a thought process. And there are 5 steps. It's arguable, again, if you need all 5, but I just want to put out there. And I highlighted the first 3 because it comes down to this whole issue of perhaps agenda setting and having some description or discussion before we put forth an agenda item, perhaps that says we're introducing something. And that is really the gist of this, to give folks, the community and other council members who may not be on the side of the majority. There are times, and frankly, that we may be unanimous on things. But just the idea that we do have sort of that step so that all council members feel that they're part of it. So I'll just do it very quickly. So that first step is where the council discusses an issue and then we place it on a meeting agenda, right? The idea that it will be publicly notified on a meeting agenda around an issue or a topic. So before that we get into the idea of drafting or introducing a draft of an ordinance. And that is really sort of one key issue here that it would be good to, again, maybe not necessarily resolution, but how is it that we put this up? So maybe it's a policy or a guideline, just so that we know that there is this stepwise approach that folks feel that there is that interim step of discussion, what the problem is. Now, ideally, as a part of that, we're not just jumping into, and I think everyone can agree, not everything needs an ordinance, right? Not everything needs an amendment, but perhaps there are other solutions that we could find there, administrative or otherwise. So really giving that opportunity to come up with some of that research, whether it's other municipalities or having committees or others really look into it. And I want to say this in a very respectful, careful way. And if we think about, for example, ethics, and again, the job that we gave the committees over the years, the ethics committee in particular, when it came to drafting, was exactly what we had asked. We asked, could you draft or could you come up with the ordinance on this particular piece? And I think where residents felt that there was something that was missing or needed was the idea of what about the research or the understanding of alternatives that may be in addition to or separate than having a solution that is legal or ordinance driven. And I feel that, you know, that piece of this is missing, and that it doesn't take a whole heck of a lot for us to just consider it, right? And I think today is a good example. I'm not saying the vote would have been different, but I do believe it would have been good and nice to have those alternatives, right? Of, well, what about a recusal piece? Or what about the idea of having a third party look at complaints? And it's just the idea of having those options out there, knowing that they've been researched and that they can be put on the table. So that is kind of where we are. And then the rest, you know, follows the regular process.
Could you send this to us?
Yeah, could I just request, if I might interject here? It would just be kind of common courtesy to send these out in advance instead of making us try to follow along without a computer. Hello. Just send it out in advance, please.
No, it's a fair point, Susan, and I appreciate that. And I do apologize. As others know, and we'll get to shortly, I was working quite diligently on the treasurer report. It was a little bit more complex than I think in the past couple months. So and there, anyway, with that said, absolutely, when there is the bandwidth and time, but I had to focus on things that were a little bit more I think germane and also time sensitive, because we know that we're going to be planning out the budget for this fiscal year coming up starting this month. So, but I appreciate the point well taken. The next, just one more. I said one. Oh, I apologize. So questions. This is the last one. I do believe that there is a good discussion for us to have on role and authorities of the council staff and community on introducing or developing ordinances. And I share this with you because again, if we look at that Somerset piece, the Somerset code, Somerset has a mayor. And so that mayor has certain authorities that are distinguishable from other council members. And I think that if we really were to look in a mirror of what we've had in these past couple of months, that is really what has been mimicked, is the idea that we've had a mayor. And again, Arthur, if there ever have a mayor, no deference to our Keith, who I always refer to as mayor. I mean, certainly, you know, I would say, you know, you deserve that title as well. But I just want to put that out there because I think when it comes to the council, the charter, and actually what VMA is actually has in place, we don't quite have that structure. And so a little bit of tweaking just to consider, and I say it with all fairness and deference, and again, with my great respect to Ron, who I know is out there, but there have been questions, I think, you know, others on the council certainly would have loved to probably ask. And now I do want to say, whether it's been Andrew or Susan or Arthur, I have never necessarily felt that I haven't been able to get those questions. In fact, there have been times I've reached out to Ron. I've always copied the manager. I've always copied the chair at the time because that's the protocol. And no one has said, no, you can't have that access. However, it is that kind of an odd step of just understanding that we are shaping and developing legislation that could affect the whole village when it comes to an ordinance, that there's sort of this unspoken or at least uncodified piece that says only the manager and only the chair can turn the clock on. And I do think that we should consider at least the idea, except with a quorum, then if there's a quorum of council members, then, so if you had directed or asked a question to Ron, you could do it because you, again, this is where we have to, where is this? Where is it written? But that is at least the working assumption. So if you or the manager reaches out to Ron, you can start the clock. But if I or Susan or Andrew or Katie have that same question, technically speaking, unless we're in a public forum, we can't actually get a response until there is a quorum or you or the manager direct. I believe that is cost savings. But I just want to put that out. This is not necessarily we need to talk about it more. But I think in the scope of ordinances, we just want to be that we have a level playing field to ask questions. And it could be as simple as, for example, hey, let's have a person who is designated as the lead and just say, do you have any questions about this? And then all the council members could just send in their questions and then they all have an opportunity to do it. Because I really felt in this process, and even the building code one that we had, which again, I think was unanimous at the time, and we all felt it wasn't perfect, but we, you know, really wanted to put something out. And I know Doug and Naomi who had put, you know, inputs, was the idea, you know, just a process that we know we can give voice to other council members in a way that they can ask questions and they don't feel that they have to wait until a public session or that there is some unwritten policy that the lawyer or our attorney or even another consultant attorney can't respond to that. So I'll pause there. Like I said, I'm not expecting, these are a bit rhetorical. We can think about it and maybe we could just
Yeah,
come up with
put all this in form of a memo or a document that
Or
we
even a
can
copy.
take a look at and refer to.
Cool.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on, managers report.
Thank you. Everything's been going pretty well here in the office. It's been a little bit quieter February, but things are about to pick up, especially if there's a snowstorm tomorrow night. A reminder that Monday is a holiday, President's Day, the office will be closed. Jeff and I have been talking about holding a budget working session to start drafting the budget, which will be introduced at the next council meeting, the March council meeting, which will then be adopted. This is the FY 25 budget, which will then be adopted at the May meeting. The May meeting needs to happen in the first half of May, which means we need to move the May meeting. That's just a reminder. I'll remind you again next month that we're moving the May meeting to earlier in
Just
May.
to alert people that this budget working session on February 28th, it will be an open session. So any resident or non-resident is welcome to attend.
And I think in the past, the attendance has been sparse, but we
Smart.
do,
There has
we do
been one or
welcome.
two people wandering through. Yeah.
we welcome it.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, that's February 28th at 10 a.m. And I know Arthur and Jeff and I will all be there. So more the merrier. On the maintenance piece, longtime village paving contractor Mike Veers has gone out of business. He-
All our people are aging out.
He was hoping his son would take over the business, but he decided paving contracting work was way too hard for him. And so he has retired and closed his business.
Hmm.
Luckily, we completed all our paving jobs that we had kind of lined up last year before he went out of business. So we're okay for now, but we've already gotten one complaint about a cracked curb. So we're gonna have to find a new contractor before we can do any of those little maintenance jobs.
Hmm.
So I'll start working on an RFP to post and get that whole process started on that earlier than expected. Rolling Acres will, if there's more than 2 inches of snow, and if there's more than 2 inches of snow that lasts for more than 6 hours, because I think it's supposed to be, 40 degrees or something by midday Saturday. So we'll see about this one. But in the future, if there is a snowstorm, that's a serious snowstorm that requires snow plowing, they will plow all of the sidewalks. I repeat, they will plow all of the sidewalks. When we did go out and measure, there is 197 houses that have sidewalks in front of them in the Village of Martins Additions. That is a lot of sidewalks, but they have a machine that can do it efficiently. It's actually more efficient than them hand shoveling the 30 so houses that requested this service. So it'll be
Zip through.
about the same cost. People are still responsible for any missed sections. They're still responsible for their walkways. So you can still get out and shovel your neighbors. Thank you very much. But we're gonna test this. This is a pilot program
Okay.
and we'll see if it works. If it works, that's a new service. And I'm hopeful that it will. So moving forward. Project updates, Brookville Road is moving forward. We do have a conceptual design plan from Clark Azar and Associates for what a 5-foot sidewalk would look like from Turner all the way to Quincy. There is some issues with it, specifically with the survey. They're having hard times tying in specific points and figuring out, they have one point correct and they have another point correct, but is it a straight line between those 2 points or is it a curved? Where the utility lines run wasn't picked up in the first survey. So they're going to have to come back and do additional surveying or figuring out what the cost is and in negotiations on that. Second problem is that there's several property lines. The right of way that off the road that is public right of way is very narrow at certain points. And there's a couple properties where the property line interferes with where we want to run the sidewalk. So we'll have to either seek an easement from those people or figure out a way to amend the sidewalk to go around those really tight points.
Well, Ron, a quick question on that. Getting an easement to put in a somewhat wider sidewalk, is this an onerous process or what's involved?
Well, it depends. So you'd probably want to first see if you have neighbor buy-in, because ultimately you would need to negotiate those
Right.
easements, and they may
Okay.
be permanent easements or temporary construction easements.
Okay, well, we'll deal with that as and when it comes.
And Doug Lohmeyer and I are walking the sidewalk next week and marking which properties we'll need temporary easements from. That's, during construction,
During
we'll be
construction.
entering 3 feet or whatever, versus which properties we might need permanent easements for. They
Right.
still own the property, but we just are maintaining the first foot of it or so
Right.
with a sidewalk. So we're in the process of figuring that all that out. Katie, do you have your hand raised?
I do. I had a question or wanted to bring an issue to your attention, Michael. A couple of residents, not emailed, they just told me in passing, and I actually noticed it myself. The sidewalk on Brookville, right before Turner Lane, right before the shops, there's a manhole cover there, and it's a little jiggly, loose. Like when you walk on it, it's just some people have raised issues like, you know, if you just hit it the right way, what if someone fell through? Probably highly unlikely, but I think it just needs a tightening. So I don't know who that domain that falls in, but it is on our stretch of sidewalk right before the market and falls in Village of Martin's Addition. So I just wanted to flag that for you. I've been meaning to tell you about that.
Katie, you can assure people that the manhole cover is not going to fall through. They're conical shape, so that at the surface, the diameter is much larger than below. So it's their design, in no way can they fall through,
That's correct, but we'll still get that.
but they still jiggle.
We'll still get
They
that
do,
fixed.
yeah.
I
Something
just took note of that. Thank you. You can always shoot me a email or a call anytime there's an issue like this, and I can get it resolved. And if I can't, I can find who will. We recently got the storm drain cover fixed on Oxford Street. So that was quite a process, but the county brought out some heavy equipment and did that. So it is possible to get the county to fix things. And that is a county manpower. So thank you for that. I also met with members of PEPCO. PEPCO is doing an audit all over the state to determine how many streetlights there are and who owns them and who's being charged for that electricity that runs those streetlights. So they did an audit of our streetlights, and they came up with a much lower number than what they've been charging us for. They've been charging us for 74 streetlights, and they only could count 67. So they were wondering why there's the discrepancy. And then they're also going to their Public Service Commission to determine what they're going to do about that discrepancy. They can change the invoice going forward if in fact there's only 67 streetlights, but how far back are they going to back pay us? So right now we're still trying to figure out exactly how many streetlights there are and where they are. So we had a report of us buying 71 or 72 streetlights. So now we have 3 different numbers of how many streetlights there are. So it's a matter of me walking around with a map and marking every single one. So that's a project we're working on right now. And composting is now free in the village. We had another person sign up today, bringing the total to 88 households that are now composting in the village. That's up about 20 households since we made it free in January. So that's a really good increase, and we're preventing all of that waste from going to landfills. Another environmental improvement that we made this year is we have cut leaf bag consumption in this village by more than half to compare to last year. So that's pretty impressive. We ordered half as many leaf bags, and if you're watching on video, you can see there's a whole lot back there. So if you want to come get some leaf bags, there's more for you there. And the last thing I'll say is I did include Doug's building report. We're kind of at this phase where we're finishing up several projects around the village and about to close out some permits. There's also some more coming online that I've mentioned a couple times, and I mentioned here again. And I've also updated a wall display here in the office. So I'm trying to be as transparent as possible. If you want to come and look at any permits, if you want to come and see what permits we have open around the village, they are all on the wall right there. There's a cover page for every single one that's open and every single one that I know is coming. And the permit and the plans are all here. So I'm trying to be as transparent as possible, and I will continue to do that. So if you want to come review any plans, just give me a heads up and we can make that happen. And that concludes my report.
Any questions for Michael? Okay,
Superb.
good, thank you. And treasurer's report.
Wonderful. I'll jump right in, and there are a couple things I want to highlight. I think in general, the statement that we usually share, and it holds true again, is that we are in really seemingly fantastic fiscal standing. And in particular, just pointing out, and this is in the written notes, but just a couple things I want to share because we are having our budget meetings coming up and planning meetings. We have a larger than a typical surplus of total income, which obviously is a great thing. And just putting that in perspective, we have a surplus of over $360,000. Now, I want to put that out there because this is one of those things, as Arthur and others know, you have to dig a bit deeper. And we have this for a couple things. We have the ARPA funds, which I'll mention in a moment separately on something else, but also because of just the way that the world has been with interest rates and other things, we've actually had a very significant accrual of income on just interest on our reserves. So this is really fantastic, right? But we have to just appreciate that, as we know, like we did last year, we also did reduce our taxes. And so these are one-off. And also with ARPA, these are not things you could just simply save. We do have to spend them by the end of the year. So we just want to be a little bit careful because actually our income, as Arthur has shared in multiple occasions, not just this surplus, but just in general, our income are driven by a fairly small number of households in terms of the large tranches that come in. And so while we're on really great fiscal standing, I think some members of this council have served or certainly have been in tune to know that there have been times that we've gone through austere times. And so just putting out there that even though we have these surpluses, we do have to appreciate many are one-offs, some are instances or situations that we don't know for how long they may arise. And so we do still have to be prudent and model out our general costs because at some point, even though we are in the red, they could easily shift. And so we want to be a little bit careful. And so just the only final other points, and I promise I'll make it pretty quick. The pilot programs, and I know it's a relatively small amount, but just to put out there because there were folks and residents concerned about the idea of supporting these pilots, whether it was Chevy Chase at home or the snow shoveling. They've been underway. I think we have some really good results and impact, and we'll talk about that, right? Because they were pilots, and we want to talk about the idea of continuing them. What does it mean? Is there enough results? Is there enough impact and uptake that we would continue it the same way or what have you? So I wanted to put that out. And then finally, I already mentioned it, but it is definitely worth mentioning again. The ARPA funds, we have a significant amount. And as we had spoken to our accountant, Arthur was on the call with our manager, not long ago. These have to be outlaid by the end of the year. And we still have a pretty good chunk, at least what we say notified, they
have
do
to be
need
under contract.
under
by the end of the
contract.
year. Yeah.
So we do, obviously, we have a process, but I just want to put that out there. So it's part of our budgeting coming up because this is calendar year as opposed to fiscal year, which in government, local or federal, always drives you crazy how to figure out those two. But so at the end of the calendar year, but part of the next budget fiscal year, we just want to make sure that we get those things allocated before the end of this calendar year. Otherwise, it's you snooze, you lose, and we don't want to lose.
And just to follow up on that, the water committee is going to be wanting to do some engineering work. They have a proposal in to the state to have that funded by a state grant. But they may want to start it before the state, if the state grants it, if they approve it. But we may want to start something before that. So, okay. We are nearing the end and we have an opportunity if there are any more residents still out there. Good night, Keith.
Good night, Keith.
Any residents with their hands up? Marty.
Thank you again. And I want to thank Michael for putting up those permits on the wall. And I want to thank, I guess it's you, Arthur, maybe the whole committee, the whole council, for now putting out public notice to all residents when you have a permit hearing or a variance hearing, not just to the adjacent neighbors. I think that's a really good transparency and I hope you will continue to do that. I have a question from another neighbor about follow-up on parking enforcement. Still a problem, not just behind the shops with the trucks, but apparently there are some side streets, a couple of them where people have trucks parked in front of their house that almost block the street. One neighbor called me about that, said, what can you do? What's parking enforcement like? And I said I would bring it up at this meeting, so I am duly representing the neighborhood in that. Michael, do we have a plan for parking enforcement?
It's
It's an ongoing sore subject.
yeah, it's a challenge.
What's the issue? What's the problem?
Well, we don't actually, I mean, well, there's multiple things. If cars are parked legally, there's nothing the county police or we could do with our policing authority to do anything about that.
Even if
And
the truck blocking the street in front of somebody's house, if it's legally parked, the street blocking isn't an issue? That we can
well, if
do?
it's blocking the street, that wouldn't be legally parked, but yeah, there's nothing we can do about that. And that's really hard, and that's hard to say to people that are annoyed by a vehicle that's parked in a certain way. But yeah, that was the response that we got in the last couple of weeks with one specific issue that I think you're referring to. And you know, we did have our police officers, Nick and Mike, the county police officers that are off duty, that work for us 10 hours a week, did go and speak to that resident and, you know, ask them to move it. And apparently the resident at that point just said that it was a issue with a dead battery and they'll move it as soon as they can. But and I've asked that resident to kind of contact me so we can maybe talk about solutions, but they have yet to do that. So I'm kind of in the dark. And the other thing is, you know, the village does not have any system set up at this point to do ticketing. You know, we could do ticketing there. We've talked about it numerous times since I've been here. And it's complicated to say the least, because then you have to go to traffic court and you have to pay someone. Specifically, the police officer that you're hiring has to be able to go to the traffic court. And our police officers won't do that for us, because that would put them in an awkward position where they're working for the county and for us. And I don't think we want to get in a position where we're sending our attorney at that rate to go to traffic court. Sometimes at traffic court, you have to sit there all day too. It's not a, you know, in and out kind of situation. So it becomes pretty cumbersome, and where we're just sending empty warnings to people. And multiple times a week, I walk out and ask construction vehicles to move. I get calls multiple times a day for people that are annoyed by someone parking in front of their driveway and parking in front of a fire hydrant. I have said repeatedly to this council, I think we need to solve this problem. I don't know what the solution is, but it's definitely a problem.
Yeah, we've wrestled with this. As Michael said, there are legal requirements that are onerous, and we have not solved it. The legal parking problem, we don't have anything to say about. Illegal is what the issues are that we potentially can do something about. But I think solving the North Korea issue is going to be easier. Yeah,
Marty, were you done? I just wanted to add a quick comment to that, unless you had other things you wanted to bring up.
Marty, you're
We're having trouble hearing you.
not coming out.
Okay.
You have to jiggle it again.
Jiggling it. Is that better?
Okay, you're coming in.
Okay.
Go.
My suggestion would be hire a parking enforcement officer part-time on a contract basis. To go to court.
Yeah, that's something that has been discussed. We're looking, no solution. It has been mentioned, I should say.
So again, this is a conversation that could be taken perhaps a bit offline now that we've discussed and open and maybe but I want to just cut to the chase on something. And Michael, I know we've had our WhatsApp sort of back and forth. One thing I wanted to put out there, and again, it may be something that is possible, is the idea of some sort of towing possibility. So rather than the idea that we're going to do fines, because again, I don't think that we need to do fines, nor do I think a deterrent, but I put this out there. What if it's a real public safety issue. Like, for example, and again, these are illustrative because it is not my area of expertise. So I don't want to say fire hydrant because that might be like a 911 and they just, put the hose through the window. But like, for example, what if it is an abandoned vehicle? And what if the police come up and they do this research and they notify Michael and say, hey, it's not a resident, and all of this. I just feel that there may be something in between where maybe we issue one of those, like a red warning thing that says, if you don't move within 24 or 48 hours, we're towing. And then it's up to the driver at their own expense to kind of take it out. I just put it out there because I do think teeth are needed. It's one of those things like the ethics where you hope you never have to use it, but we should be perhaps prepared, because with the purple line and everything else, I don't want to be lulled into a place of complacency where, look, Katie went through a terrible experience with her car. There are things that can happen, and we just want to make sure their neighborhood is safe. And anyway, I put it out there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other comments? Anybody there?
Paula?
Paula, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. No, I was just wondering if putting, to prevent some of the illegal parking, which happens on my street all the time, on the even number side, where you're not allowed to park. There are signs. People don't pay any attention to them. But I have noticed in other communities where I go, like Annapolis or whatever, there's a red line or a yellow line painted on the curb. And people seem to get that message better than a sign that points in two directions. I don't know. I've just observed this over time. I mean, that might help some of it. I don't think it's going to help like a long-term abandoned car. But anyway, it was just a thought again.
Thank you, Paul. We have gone through this in the village in the past. Our traffic engineer hates painted curbs for some reason. And we have not painted a curb in probably 20 years. He likes signs, but maybe something to come back to.
Well, he may like signs, but he's not getting results.
Right. And
So-
the question is whether you're right. People do seem to notice curbs.
Right. I
think
mean,
we should bring that up again.
So I can mention,
go
I
ahead.
can mention something about painted curbs as well. Painted curbs can indicate what law or signs are actually enforce. A painted curb is not enforceable. You can't ticket what a painted curb is. You can't. It's only if there's already a statutory law or a sign indicating that that's no parking, and the curb's red, then you can ticket.
well, see, if you got a
but if
sign,
it's-
go ahead and add some paint. Maybe it'll help.
Right.
Right.
So,
We've
so
already
now you're
paid
not
for
talking.
the sign.
Right.
You're
So,
right.
so now you're not talking about one layer of signage, you're talking about 2 layers of signage, and then the upkeep and the cost and all those considerations come into it. And then it still comes down to people are just parking in front of where they know they're not allowed to park. It's not a matter of communicating where they are or aren't allowed to park. It's a matter of enforcement that we're having a hard time with.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Any other comments from council members? With that, it is 9:13 and we will bring this meeting to a close. We are adjourned.
Thank you all.